Lord of Mysteries. Fire of Destruction Chapter 221 to 230. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Your father hasn't been acting weird, has he? Adrian asked as he looked at Jerry. He noticed small changes in the girl. The aura that the girl gave off had become brighter and more cheerful like a normal child. It seems that with her father healed, she is more relaxed now. That makes sense, the redhead concluded. When any of his parents got sick, he would worry a lot and become more serious till they recovered. Today was Thursday and he had come to check on the condition of the girl's father. They were both sitting in the same place as last time, on the old wooden steps of the top floor. Jerry was sitting on the same step as Adrian, a few feet away, her hands clasped gently in her lap. He is still the same as always, Mr. Holmes, why? Jerry raised an eyebrow, her tone showing a little confusion. Since she had given him the liquid from the vial to drink, her father had completely improved, he was even able to return to work in the factory. Adrian ignored the girl's questioning look, he tilted his head slightly and asked nonchalantly. He hasn't been saying anything about how he misses the sun or praising the sun. Jerry was taken by surprise for a few seconds, she didn't respond but tried to remember some instances of her father acting that way. After a few moments, she shook her head slightly. There was nothing strange or any attitude like the one you described, he is still the same as he was before he fell ill. Although much more affectionate, she added mentally. I simply wanted to know how he was recovering, a mere curiosity of a doctor towards his patient. Adrian responded calmly, internally relieved. Well, if someone drinks the sun water produced by Talk Millennium, they won't be turned into crazy fans of the eternal blazing sun. Of course, it may be because the quantity drank was too small, but this can be confirmed later. That strange grandfather has good hands, the redhead praised the grandfather's ability as he got rid of two of the doubts about his artifact. The question was whether diseases were considered evils that the holy water could solve. Thanks to Jerry's father, he knew that was the case. Also, now he knew that it was safe to directly consume the same water, there was no risk of becoming a crazy believer of the eternal blazing sun. If I'm ever lost somewhere, all consumable water concerns have been solved. Leaving that aside, it seems that she's more comfortable with me, the redhead thought, amused and curious as he saw that Jerry was sitting a bit far from him. Unlike the first time, where she had always stood in front of him, never approaching him or turning her back on him. Now she sat a few steps away from him, looking at him calmly. Her gray eyes didn't give him that feeling of being watched or analyzed. He then nodded and said, satisfied. That's good to hear that, Jerry. I have a question I'd like you to answer. Ask Mr. Holmes, Jerry said with a little more emotion. In the building where they do the tests, are there any conditions to be chosen to enter to do the tests? Jerry's eyes widened slightly in surprise at this question, she quickly recovered and answered calmly. There are no conditions, Mr. Holmes, anyone can be chosen to enter, but usually the Truman Street workers are chosen. Ads by PubFuture. Adrian nodded at the information, several plans formed in his head, under his mask an arrogant smile grew. Rising from his spot, Adrian looked at Jerry. It has been a pleasure working with you, little one. Recently I found out that this weekend there will be a lot of noise, so it will be better that you and your father stay at home to be safe. Jerry easily caught the man's warning and her mouth dropped slightly, she nodded. Thank you for the warning, Mr. Holmes. Adrian just nodded and walked down the stairs. Wait, sir. Just as he got to the first landing on the stairs, Jerry spoke up and stopped him. Adrian turned to look at the girl curiously. Jerry had gotten up from her spot, her ears slightly red and she could barely make eye contact. What's up, Jerry? The redhead asked, interested. Jerry took a few breaths to gather her courage, then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of newspaper. She held the piece out to him with her shaking arm, she couldn't hold any more eye contact and lowered her head sheepishly, her ears bright red now. Please could you? She stammered, her tone dropping lower and lower until it was barely above a whisper. Adrian was slightly surprised by that, he went back up the stairs and took the newspaper that Jerry had handed him. The girl then lowered her arm and lifting her head slightly, she looked with her gray eyes full of anticipation at Adrian. You look like my dog Meal, she was a very small brown poodle like you, she also looked at me like that when she wanted to play ball. Adrian thought, full of tenderness, he lowered his gaze and looked at the piece of newspaper. It was a section with a pretty decent drawing of him as Holmes, even though it was skinnier than he actually was. It was obvious that it was a recent one. Princess Tomato, it seems your fan wants your autograph. Flora teased with amusement, laughing softly. A slight blush grew on Adrian's cheeks, but controlling himself, he spoke calmly. Oh, would you like me to sign this little one? Jerry, not trusting her voice, just nodded. The blush had spread to her cheeks. Adrian chuckled softly at how cute Jerry looked. He pulled a red fountain pen from his pocket. I can't disappoint my most faithful fan, he said teasingly, causing the girl to lower her head embarrassed. He signed the newspaper and handed it back to Jerry. The girl took it with her trembling hands. She had a smile and looked excitedly at the man's signature. Underscore for my number one fan heart underscore. Ads by PubFuture. Underscore James Holmes underscore. She blew out a shaky breath and hugged the newspaper with a big smile, her eyes closed. But they opened when she felt a hand petting her head. She looked at the man's creepy mask in surprise. Adrian chuckled softly, removing his hand from the girl's head. He turned and walked down the stairs as he said goodbye to the girl. Take care, Jerry. Jerry looked dazedly at the man as he walked away, but before he was out of sight she ran down the stairs. She stopped at the landing and watched as the man was putting a black band around his arm. Will I ever see you again? She asked desperately, and Adrian calmly donned the burnt band. I hope not, he thought with the corners of his lips shaking. He then turned to look at Jerry. Maybe someday. He then turned around and entering the shadows of the floor he disappeared. Jerry ran to the place where she had seen the man but couldn't find him anywhere. It was as if he had evaporated. She could only tightly hug the newspaper with the man's signature. From a nearby alley, Adrian gazed at the residential building for a few moments before turning and starting to walk away. Princess Tomato is a softie, Flora sang mischievously, and Adrian sighed. What's that about Miss Dancing Worm? Adrian countered calmly. Flora got stuck for a few moments, but recovering, she answered amused. Well, you went to all that trouble with that girl to help her without needing to do that at all. Your heart is a sweet marshmallow, Princess Tomato. You know that everything could have only taken 10 minutes, she said a little darkly. I'm not killing a child, Adrian replied coldly, his voice an iceberg. I never said anything about killing, Princess. You know it's not necessary to do that, but you still went through all that trouble for the girl, Flora said carelessly, but then she chuckled. That makes you a softie, she said mischievously. Adrian just sighed. Internally he agreed with Flora as well as disagreed. He was able to simply channel Jerry's spirit to get everything she knew without having to go through all that trouble. And normally he would have done it. He knew that there was no need to kill Jerry to speak with her spirit. Thanks to the book that Isengard had given him, he knew how to do it, but he didn't do it with her. His bottom line was innocent children. He would not hurt or take advantage of innocent children in such a way. If they were evil he had no problem, but Jerry was innocent. Sighing, he continued on his way. I really am a softie. Furs sighed as she adjusted the mask on her face. Goodbye my sleeping days, she thought sadly as she put on her robe and raised the hood. She looked out of the corner of her eye as Zio looked at her. She was with her arms crossed and her expression was serious. Her friend was already wearing her own robe and her mouth mask around her neck. She had a light layer of makeup on to make her look older than she was. Remember what Holmes said? Zio reminded, and Furs nodded. The man's words still rang loud in their heads. We will only go for the stomach pouch of a spirit eater. Next week we will use another channel to get the deep sea marlin's blood. Zio continued, and Furs could only sigh. She was a little anxious for today. She was afraid that she would be discovered and hunted down as Holmes had told them. Zio looked at the clock hanging on the wall, and seeing the time, she turned to look at Furs. We have to go. At her friend's words, Furs let out a shaky breath and drew a triangular emblem on her chest while making a quick prayer. Please give me your protection. Stepping into the familiar great room, the anxiety Furs felt rose several notches. The fact that Mr. A was watching everything from his seat didn't help calm her down. To calm down, she entered cogitation, and after a few moments, her breathing and heart calmed down. Opening her eyes and looking to her side, she saw Zio. She was calm and collected. The benefits of having trained as a noble. Furs couldn't help feeling envious of her friend because of how easily she was able to control herself. Let's go to the blackboard, the blonde whispered, and Furs nodded slightly. They both headed towards the multiple blackboards that were taped to the wall. Next to each blackboard was a worker with their arms behind their backs. They both walked to a random blackboard, grabbed a piece of chalk that was there and wrote their need in one of the free rows on Hermes. Furs looked at the rest of the orders while Zio finished writing. Looking for the potion formula of melee scholar. Room 15. Looking for the potion formula of conspirator. Looking for the black hunting spider's composite eye. Looking for the potion formula of apprentice. Room 9. Seeking information on members of the Abraham family. The reward depends on the information. Room 5. Abraham, that is the family that suffers the curse of the blood moon, who is looking for them and why. She remember very well what the red-haired Adrian had told them regarding the curse and how this family suffered from it. Also remembering the words of James Holmes made Furs come to a realization. As the Abraham family being hunted, why would someone do that? That makes no sense. If only Adrian was still alive, Zio could get more information from him, she wailed internally. Ads by PubFuture. In the newspaper a few weeks ago there was an article about an explosion and disappearance of a red-haired man named Adrian Kenway. The photo of the man finished confirming that it was him. It's certain that the officials found him or provoked someone he shouldn't have. If it's because of his personality, it must be the latter. Also considering that they had not been arrested, the second option was the most likely. With that side cut off, only James Holmes remained, and if their interaction with him was any indicator. Even if they spent all their money, they couldn't get anything from the madman. And if she went to room 5 and asked, "I don't want to die," Furs thought scared as she unconsciously touched the stone on her bracelet. She was also tempted to accept selling the apprentice formula, but her intuition warned her that it was a bad idea. I'm sure it's a trap to lure the clueless apprentices and members of the Abraham family. She was sure that Zio thought the same, which is why she hadn't suggested selling the formula. Finding a place to sit, Furs and Zio calmly waited for a worker to tell them that someone possessed what they were looking for. She watched on the other side as a worker approached a person dressed in a robe and mask and whispered something to them. The person got up and followed the worker. From the movement of their hips, Furs assumed that it was a woman. Lucky, she thought enviously as she continued to wait for someone to approach them. The worker opened the door to room number 3 and let the masked woman in. She calmly entered and saw how in the simple room with only some sofas in front of a table there was a hooded man. The formula or the black hunting spider's composite eye? She asked serenely. Eye of the spider, the man answered shortly. The woman nodded gently. How much? 2,600 pounds, the man said seriously. Beneath her mask, the woman frowned slightly. It's too much, lower it to 2,000 pounds. The man clicked his tongue with force and said annoyed. Are you crazy, woman? Do you know how hard it is to kill that thing? 2.400 is the lowest I'll go. 2.100, the woman said nonchalantly, and the man grunted. You're crazy if you think I'll go that low. 2.200 pounds, last offer, take it or fuck off. The woman smiled under her mask and took from her tunic 2 thick bands of money that she tossed to the man who caught it with no problem. Bitch, the man muttered annoyed and quickly began to count the money. Confirming that it was complete, he put the money in one pocket and took out a medium-sized container from another, and threw it at the woman who caught it without problem. Take it and get out. The woman ignored the order and opened the container, breaking the wall of spirituality around her. Ads by PubFuture. The woman's reddish-orange eyes narrowed slightly. After a few moments, she nodded and closing the container she reapplied the wall of spirituality. It's been a pleasure doing business with you, the woman said gracefully, and the man grunted. Fuck off. The woman smiled under her mask and left the room, leaving the grumpy man to himself. She didn't return to her seat but went to the whiteboard and using an eraser she erased looking for the potion formula of conspirator and the asterisk looking for the black hunting spider's composite eye. With that done, she returned to her seat and waited for the meeting to end. Furs looked at this a little curious. Before she could think about how curious the woman was, a worker approached her. The woman walked away from the place where the meeting was taking place and making sure she wasn't being followed, she entered the sewers when she found an opportunity. She had no problems moving through the sewers. After about 15 minutes she saw how in the distance there was a source of light. Getting closer she saw how a red-haired man was leaning against the wall. Next to him there was a ball of fire floating, illuminating him. The woman walked until she was a few steps away from him. She took off her mask and lowered her hood, showing her beautiful face to the man. Then she gave a military salute with a serious face. Sir, the black hunting spider's composite eye has been obtained. Adrian smiled at that as he nodded. Good job, soldier. The redhead said satisfied as he pushed away from the wall. The woman nodded in acceptance of her lord's praise. How much did it cost? All, sir. The woman said seriously, and Adrian just sighed internally. My pockets are dry and I still need the Sphinx's brain, the supplementary ingredients, and the complete formula. He made a mental calculation and could only lament. I hope Deadshot is loaded. Considering that they traffic arms and people, I'm sure they have a lot of money. Now he was much more determined for the attack on the weekend. All the preparations were ready now, all that remained was to wait for tomorrow. He nodded to the soldier in front of him. You can rest, soldier. The woman nodded and took from her robes the container that she handed to Adrian. Then she closed her eyes and dissolved into golden dust that floated up to Adrian's forearm. Adjusting back to Soldier Bird's appearance, Adrian returned his attention to the container in his hands. He opened it by breaking the wall of spirituality. It was an eye whose sclera was deep purple, its iris was brilliant red, and the pupil was huge, ghostly white, and sharp. The eye was very large, about the size of a tennis ball. The eye still had the nerves that were pink and blood red, they were about 5 centimeters long. Adrian felt the slight urge to bite into this eye like an apple, he could even feel that his mouth was getting a little dry. He quickly closed the container with a loud clack and let out a sigh. One down, one to go. Truman Street is like any other street in the East Borough. A horrible smell in the air and garbage everywhere. The workers with dead eyes and sick bodies walking to get to their job or find one, the street girls trying to eat someone, and the ever-present homeless people in the alleys consuming strange substances to cope. There was nothing that set Truman Street apart from any other street in the East Borough. In front of a bar on this street. Jeff, how many do you have? Asked a middle-aged man with a thin body and a high nose. Jeff snorted and spat to the side. 3 for now, I still need 4 more, he said, annoyed as he brought a cheap cigarette to his lips. He was middle-aged, severely bald, his body was also quite thin. The other man frowned while clicking his tongue. What are you doing standing there like an idiot then? We only have 10 minutes before the test starts, he said, annoyed, and Jeff gave him a look. Don't speak loudly, you idiot, do you want to be punished? Jeff grunted and looked around, trying to see that no one had heard them. This made Jerk curse at his slip, he started looking around as well. Seeing that they hadn't caught anyone's attention, they sighed with relief, but then Jeff hit the other. Charlie, control that mouth of yours, this may be our zone, but you can't go saying it in the middle of the street. Charlie grunted and shook his head. Why do we have to be so careful all of a sudden? Just because of some madman with a mask. Jeff punched Charlie hard in the stomach. He covered the man's mouth and looked around, pale. Idiot, what did I tell you about opening your mouth? Do you want that monster to appear here? Do you want to die? He whispered angrily, there was a trace of fear in his voice. Charlie pushed Jeff's hand away and started to cough, he put a hand to his stomach. What's wrong with that? Before, we could walk around here and do whatever we wanted, but when that crazy man suddenly appeared, we have to be discreet. Don't fuck with me, Charlie said hatefully. He's just a man. Did you forget what that madman did? He destroyed Creed in one day and destroyed the cave. He did that alone, and if we're not careful, we'll be next. Why do you think the boss ordered us to be more careful and discreet? Jeff said angrily, and Charlie growled. We are different from those animals. He went for the weak because he is a coward. He knows that if he attacks us, the only thing that will happen is that his head will be hung on a stake. Jeff clucked at Charlie's stupidity. Knowing that it would be futile to try to reason with the man, he decided to return to the main topic. Let's go for my last 4 and let's get this over with. Charlie didn't say anything, he just nodded, still annoyed, and followed Jeff. Since the appearance of that masked man, no one in the gang was allowed to go out alone, they always had to be accompanied for everything, even if it was just to go to the bathroom. This was humiliating for Charlie, who no longer had the privacy to do anything. It made him feel like a child that needed his mother to clean after he took a shit. Even getting people for tests had become more complicated than before. Before, they just had to walk up to someone and offer to come in exchange for money. Fast and easy. Now they had to look for people who were weak and easy to manipulate with money. In any corner of the East Borough, you can find these kinds of people, but most of the time they chose Truman Street. Why? It was quite simple. Charlie used the corners of his eyes to see a group of homeless people. They looked at the people begging for money, but at the same time, they looked at him and Jeff. Ads by PubFuture. The same thing happened with other workers who were sitting in other parts. This street was full of his gang mates, so if the masked madman showed up, the guy would get a hail of bullets. It didn't take too long to find the missing people. With their work finished, they returned to the building, being followed by the people they chose. The 7 people looked weak and tired, none of them dared to raise their heads too high, and they were hunched over. Arriving at the building that they know as Point Blank, they entered through the back door. Walking through the old corridor, they came to some stairs and went down them, being followed by the workers who were a bit nervous. Going down all the stairs, they came to a dirty basement with dusty furniture and old tools on the walls. On the other side of the basement there was another door. Arriving at the door, Jeff approached it and hit it in a special rhythm. As he gave the last blow, he stepped away from the door. After a while, the sound of chains being removed, boards being removed rang from behind the door. Charlie frowned at that, annoyed. All this for a crazy coward. What a joke. As he internally complained about the gang's cowardice, he was watched by one of the workers who had his head down. Finally, after a while, the door was opened, and 3 men armed with automatic weapons looked at everyone with cold eyes. This only made the workers more nervous, but they tried to hide it so as not to lose the opportunity to obtain money. The first of the armed men, who had a missing eyebrow, spoke. "Come quickly, the tests are about to start." Jeff and Charlie nodded seriously, and both turned to see the workers they brought. "Go, and when you complete the tests you will be paid as promised," Jeff said with a sweet smile, trying to calm down the workers. It didn't work very well because the workers were more focused on weapons. Seeing this, Charlie growled and yelled, "Go, or there is no money." Jeff gave him a look, but this worked better as the 7 workers went to the entrance. Cowards. Charlie thought, annoyed, but as he watched the workers come in, he made eye contact with one of them. He had a normal face, he was stooped and thin, the only thing that stood out was his reddish-orange eyes. Charlie felt a chill making eye contact with those eyes, but before he could do anything, the worker go through the door. Shaking off the feeling, he too walked through the door with Jeff. They passed another large number of guards and went down other stairs. After another while, they came to a shooting range hidden under the building. It was a large modified room. There were a large number of guards against the walls, armed with automatic weapons and revolvers. Surrounded by 4 guards was a person sitting in a padded chair. This man was overweight, had a small deformity on his face that made one eye bigger than the other, was wearing a black tuxedo that was a little too small for him, and a tall hat. He had a small smile on his face as he looked at the people in front of him. There was a large group of workers in front of him, all of them nervous. "There's no need to be scared," the fat man said calmly. Ads by PubFuture. "As my men told you, you have to complete a test and you will be paid, a simple and easy test." When he finished saying that, he snapped his fingers. Another group of his men brought several boxes. Due to where they were located, the workers could not see what was inside. "You only have to test a few weapons and you will receive the money," he said with a small smile on his fat face. "These gentlemen will explain how to use them. There is no need to say that you better do not do anything stupid," he said heavily, and the workers accepted, scared. At this, the smile on the fat man's face became strange. He pointed to his men and they took out their weapons and began to explain how to use them. All the workers listened attentively, even the one with the reddish-orange eyes. Looking at the screen on his arm, Adrian's expression was serious. With his soldier infiltrated, he took advantage and observed all the armed guards there with his spirit vision. Most of the people there were normal people, only a few were beyonders. "I hit the nail on the head, all his guards are beyonders," Adrian said calmly, looking at Lacopa. All the guards surrounding the fat man had special auras. 2 had a faint red aura that moved like fire and seemed to burn, 1 had a faint blue aura that moved like water, and the last one had a golden aura that conveyed majesty. The last one was the strongest of the 4. 2 hunters, a sailor and 1 from the Arbiter's Path. Adrian muttered through narrowed eyes. He was sure of the pathway of the 4th because his aura was similar to Zio's, only stronger. He cut off the spirituality supply and the screen turned into golden dust and engulfed his forearm. "This got more complicated, but it's still within my capabilities. I can easily deal with the 2 hunters and the sailor. The problem is that Arbiter. He's the strongest of the 4, but his aura isn't as strong as Trasis and its intensity is identical to mine, so his sequence shouldn't be higher than 7, so he's an interrogator." Adrian sighed as he crossed his arms and began to tap his bicep. "I'll have to be very careful. With Flora I can get rid of the whip of pain and psychic piercing, which are the most dangerous to me. But while I'm fighting the Beyonders, I'll have to deal with the bullets. Also, I have to protect the civilians and avoid hurting them. No doubt the wealth that this gang had to be able to raise 4 Beyonders had to be fat." Thinking of that caused a predatory smile to form on his face. "I can do this." He had all the tools to have the full advantage despite being at a considerable numerical disadvantage. Besides, it's not like I'm going to be alone down there. Sending spirituality, he reactivated the screen. "Soldier, this is the plan." Opening his eyes, he found himself back where he had hidden. in an alleyway not far from the building. "Miss Worm, are you ready?" he said confidently as he got up. "Just don't kill us, Tomato Princess," Flora said resignedly. Adrian chuckled in amusement and donning the burnt band on his left arm, he shadow leapt and disappeared from the alley. Adrian was now approaching the building through the sewers. This was the safest way to get closer as the street and buildings were full of Deadshot members. If he was seen trying to sneak in, it would ruin the surprise attack and the plan would go to hell. The fight should only last about 5 minutes if I do everything right, the redhead thought seriously as he opened his senses to the maximum. He couldn't rule out that there might be someone down here on guard duty, so he has to be ready to attack and silence them. Moving carefully and silently through the sewer, Adrian reached where the building should be. It should be here. Putting the burnt band on his left arm, Adrian sent spirituality into it. Sensing the shadows around him, he found a suitable one and shadow leapt at it. Stepping out of the shadows, he went on guard and quickly looked around. It was the same dimly lit basement that the soldier had passed. He could see the same door at the bottom of it. He let out a quiet sigh to calm himself and walked with soundless steps to the door. Reaching it, he leaned his ear against it and concentrated. He could hear the 3 armed men talking to each other. They weren't too far from the door. "Here we go," the redhead thought, determined. He took Vecchio Pomodoro out of his pocket and placed it in his left hand. Sending spirituality to the burnt band, Adrian found a good shadow to the side of 2 of them and shadow leapt. Coming out of the shadows, he didn't waste a second, and grabbing the men's necks he squeezed hard, and a crack sounded. Before the latter could react and the bodies of the 2 men could hit the ground, he had already lunged at him, and grabbing his head, he spun around hard. The man's head turned 180 degrees and he stared at the wall behind him with a surprised expression. All had happened so fast that he hadn't been able to process what had happened. Before he hit the ground, Adrian grabbed him and carefully lowered him. He hadn't used his fire or blades to kill them because the smell would alert the hunters of his presence. The strongest sense of a hunter is smell. As one progresses through the sequence, it levels off with the other senses, but during sequence 9, smell is the strongest sense. That's why Adrian wasn't worried that these guys' broken necks would be heard, because their hearing wasn't that strong during that stage. With a cold mind, he grabbed the man's automatic weapon and slung it over his shoulder. He went to the other men's guns and grabbed the magazines they had and emptied their chambers. Then he pulled out his tripwire and tied the clips together. "Do you even know how to use that thing?" Floor asked, and Adrian smiled. "No, but there is someone who knows how now," he whispered, amused, and Flora quickly understood what the man meant. "Not bad, Princess," Flora said, pleased, as if praising her dog that had learned a new trick. Adrian would have responded, but he kept his mouth shut and continued on his way to where his soldier was. He could always punish Flora later. A poorly lit corridor was where he had to go, and it was full of guards. They were all quite close together and it would be impossible to make the same move as before without alerting the others. This would trigger a fight that would alert all the guards that were here. Adrian didn't care about this. He calmly reached into his vest and pulled out a rectangular silver piece. "Crimson," he whispered in ancient Hermes, and the charm in his hand turned light, ignited into an illusory dark red flame. He quickly threw the charm and it landed in the middle of the guards. They looked surprised at this strange thing, but before they could think about how strange it was, they all heard a light cracking noise and fell asleep not a second later. Adrian shook his head to shake off the sleepiness and approached the first sleeping guard. He reached down and grabbed the man's neck, and with cold blood, he squeezed hard. Ads by PubFuture. Crack. He repeated the same with all the guards who had fallen asleep. Crack, 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 crack. Asterisk. Adrian looked at the bodies of the 10 guards he had killed with cold red eyes. Quote. Without saying anything, he turned around and continued on his way to the testing area. The way was already clear, so he didn't have to deal with any more guards. After a short while, he reached the stairs, but he didn't go down but stuck his head out slightly. He saw how Lacosta was watching from his padded seat as his men finished explaining how to use their weapons to the workers. All these were already armed. The tests are about to start. Adrian let out a soundless sigh. He reached into his pocket and took out another rectangular silver piece along with several medium balls. These balls had a small wick. It was time to make some noise. "Crimson," he muttered in ancient Hermes. He felt the charm grow lighter, igniting an illusory dark red flame. He threw it towards where the civilians were located. They were surrounded by a good part of the guards who were there to make sure that they didn't do anything stupid. At the same time, he had thrown the charm, he had also thrown the balls with the wicks lit. Everyone looked surprised as this fell in the middle of the civilians. Those who were on the radio heard a light cracking noise. All the civilians along with a good amount of the guards fell asleep. When the fuse ran out, the balls exploded in smoke that completely covered the civilians and the guards that were sleeping. "We are under attack," said the interrogator a little sleepily. The radius of effect of the charm was quite large. Despite not falling asleep directly, they would be affected by a considerable sleepiness, so their reaction would be slower for a few seconds. Adrian took advantage of this and leaping from the top of the stairs he formed several fireballs that transformed into flaming daggers that shot towards the guards and beyonders. At the same time he did that, he threw the automatic weapon into the cloud of smoke along with the clips. The interrogator was the first to recover. He grabbed the sleeping Lacopa and threw himself to the other side, managing to dodge the fire daggers. The other beyonders were a few seconds slower but managed to dodge the daggers. The guards on the other hand, ahhhhhhhhrggggg. They weren't so lucky. The daggers struck them in the stomach or their legs and stayed there, cooking the insides of these men. Before their companions could try to help them, the daggers flickered and exploded, engulfing the guards. The guards who escaped watched in terror and shock, but couldn't see for much longer as bullets hit them. These bullets came from the cloud of smoke. The infiltrated soldier ran out of the cloud of smoke. He had his automatic weapon ready and fired, hitting two other guards who were still in shock. "What are you idiots doing? Fire!" The interrogator yelled in fury, seeing this. This shout was enough to wake up the surviving guards, who raised their weapons and returned fire. The soldier and Adrian went in different directions, the redhead going towards the interrogator while dodging the bullets. And the soldier went to take cover as he returned fire, skillfully hitting another guard in the neck. Now there were only 7 guards alive out of the original 27. Seeing how Adrian was fast approaching, the interrogator cursed internally and had to throw Lacopa aside in order to fight. Adrian reached out his hand towards the interrogator and shouted in ancient Hermes. "Steal." The interrogator immediately sensed how he lost an ability. Ads by PubFuture. He couldn't try to think about what had happened because he had to dodge a torrent of fire. Before Adrian could continue his attack, he did a side jump, dodging the onslaught of the sailor who had tried to surprise him. Before he could attack the sailor, he had to jump again to avoid a hunter attack. Jumping and making distance, Adrian looked seriously as the group of Lacopa's guards gathered in front of him. Instead of caring about the situation, Adrian chuckled, amused. "Really guys? 4-on-1. That's unfair, you know. Unfair to you rather. Wouldn't you like to call 3 other friends to even things out a bit?" The faces of the hunters and the sailor turned red with anger, and before they could move to attack Adrian, the voice of the interrogator stopped them. "Idiots, control yourselves. Don't you see that he is provoking you?" The red cloud that had blinded the sight of men dissipated. "Mr. Holmes, it seems to me that this is a misunderstanding," the interrogator spoke serenely, always attentive to the shots that sounded further away from them. Adrian tilted his head curiously. "Oh, why do you think so?" The hunters and the sailor looked at the interrogator, not understanding what he was doing. The interrogator ignored that and continued. "There is no need to fight, Mr. Holmes. I am sure we can reach a good agreement to solve this misunderstanding." Okay, I don't see the problem with this," Adrian said calmly. This calmed down the interrogator. Containing his joy, he spoke. "That's perfect. Why don't we sit down and talk? I want all the money Deadshot owns, and all 4 of you." Adrian rudely cut into the interrogator, who looked at the masked man in a daze, as did the other 3. "What? Are you deaf or stupid? I want all the money Deadshot owns and the 4 of you. Is it so hard to understand?" Adrian said with fake exasperation as he shook his head in disappointment. The interrogator let out a shaky breath to calm himself down. His companions were red-faced with anger but barely holding back. "What do you mean by that, Mr. Holmes?" he asked shakily, barely containing his annoyance. Adrian sighed exaggeratedly. "Are you 4 curly-haired baboons who can't understand something so simple? It seems picking pimples off each other's ass messed up your brains," he said disappointedly, and the veins in the interrogator's neck popped. "Son of a bitch," the furious man hissed, saliva spitting out with each word like a mad dog. His companions were worse than him, as they had even taken a step in the man's direction. Adrian ignored the state of the men and shook his head again. "Seriously, you guys are stupid. I think it's an insult to the curly-haired baboons when I compare them to you guys who don't even have brains. I don't know why it crossed my mind to recruit you. If you guys are so stupid you'd choke on water," he said, full of provocation, and this was enough to make the 4 beyonders explode. "I'll kill you." The first to pounce was the sailor, who quickly rushed to Adrian, who stood still with a huge smile under his mask. The four Beyonders, whose minds were clouded in a red mist of anger, had not realized that the shots had stopped a few seconds ago. Shoot, thud. Barely taking a few steps, a bullet went through the sailor's brain and his body fell to the ground. The shot woke up the other three, who quickly moved, dodging other shots that almost hit them. One of the hunters was not fast enough and a bullet hit him in the thigh. Due to the speed the sailor was going, his body slid until Adrian stopped him with his foot on his head. "Dude, are you alright? That was quite a hard fall." The redhead asked the sailor's corpse mischievously. The undercover soldier came to his side, quickly changing the clip to a full one. Adrian looked up at the three Beyonders. He said, amused. "Now it's 2 vs 3, your handicap has only grown." Adrian looked at the group in front of him calmly. The interrogator was a man who seemed to be already in his mid-40s but still had a strong and fast body, his hair was gray and his eyes emitted majesty. The injured hunter was a man in his mid-30s, with several scars on his face and black hair. The other hunter was the youngest of the three, in his mid-20s, with bright blonde hair and sharp eyes. While still looking at the three Beyonders, he used his peripheral vision to scan his soldier. Apart from being dirty, he doesn't have any visible wounds. Can he even bleed? Also, his ability to use that weapon is quite impressive. It's the first time he's used it and he still controls it very well. While thinking that, Adrian simply snapped the fingers of his right hand and pounced at them at the same time the soldier fired. Shit. The interrogator cursed loudly and jumped to the side to dodge the bullets while the hunters jumped to the other side. The combat had been divided again, this time with the hunters versus the soldier, and the interrogator versus Adrian. Adrian wasted no time, and as he lunged at the interrogator, under his mask flashes of lightning shot from his red eyes. The interrogator had tried to buy time for the surviving guards to finish off the soldier, and Adrian had done the same. He not only bought time for the soldier to take down the guards but to digest the information on how to use psychic piercing that he got from stealing the interrogator's ability. The interrogator felt how something inside him was hit, gritting his teeth, he endured the pain and jumped to the side, dodging several fireballs that hit the place where he was. It was his ability and he had a resistance against it, so he wasn't so helpless against the attack. "Hey, didn't your daddy and mommy teach you any manners? Stay still so I can kill you." Adrian taunted as other flashes of lightning shot from his eyes and he launched another psychic piercing at the interrogator, who stumbled but still dodged the fire ravens. "You have 14 minutes left," Flora reminded calmly. Adrian smiled sharply under his mask. "I only need 2, the redhead said mischievously as he lunged at the interrogator. More fire ravens formed around him and quickly flew towards the man. The interrogator skillfully dodged the fire crows that hit the ground and stayed there like bonfires. Before he could think of his next move, he saw how Adrian snapped the fingers of his left hand and was engulfed in flames and disappeared from his sight. The flames to his side shot up, and out of it came Adrian, who did a roundhouse kick towards the man's head, who was barely able to block the surprise attack with his forearms, but it didn't stop him from being sent flying back. Still in the air, the redhead focused his eyes on the wounded hunter, who was barely able to dodge the soldier's bullets. Flashes of lightning shot from his eyes. The wounded hunter felt like something inside him was hit with a hammer with force, and this caused him to stumble. Bang, bang, bang. The soldier did not miss the opportunity and fired 3 precise shots at the hunter's forehead. Gray streaks and streams of blood shot from the back of the hunter's head, who fell to the ground dead, the upper part of his head having been destroyed. The soldier quickly used his weapon to block the attack of the remaining enraged hunter. The soldier, being smaller than the hunter, was pushed back, but before being outmatched he dropped to the ground. This unbalanced the hunter, who fell forward, and the soldier took advantage of this and placed his foot on the man's stomach. With the help of inertia and his strength, he pushed away the hunter, who fell backward a few feet from him. Raising his gun, he quickly aimed and pulled the trigger. Ads by PubFuture. Clack clack. Looking down, he saw how a casing had gotten stuck in the chamber. It seemed that even the guards' weapons were of poor quality. The hunter did not miss this second chance, and getting up from the ground quickly, he attacked the soldier, who, with no other option, had to throw the stuck weapon aside and engage in hand-to-hand combat with the hunter. Surprisingly, even though there was a slightly noticeable difference in strength, it wasn't very big. The soldier was even in some cases able to push the hunter back and land good hits that stunned the man. Adrian blocked a low kick from the interrogator with his left leg and deflected a cross jab with his left forearm. Due to the flaming jump he did, the interrogator hadn't let him get more than 3 steps away from him. Now he was acting like a very annoying mosquito that wouldn't part with Adrian without drinking a little blood first. The interrogator knew that distance was his greatest weakness and that he would be in a bad situation if he allowed Adrian to get away. With the same arm he used to block the attack, Adrian tried to strike the interrogator's face, who crossed his arms to block the blow. But Adrian stopped his punch, a wide smile tugging at his lips, lightning flashing in his eyes. The interrogator felt a chill run up his spine as he watched Adrian suddenly open his palm. Shit! Before he could move away, a psychic piercing hit him again, and this momentarily stunned him. This was enough for Adrian. A powerful torrent of orange flames engulfed the interrogator's upper body, which he was unable to dodge, and took the attack full on. The interrogator was sent flying several meters away and his body hit the ground hard, flames still burning. The simple shirt had been burned, and the upper part of his body had severe second and third degree burns showing the whitish pink flesh underneath. But despite his injuries, the man shakily got up. His face was horribly burned, his eyes were melted, his nose was black, and his hair was on fire. His breathing was rough and short. With every labored breath he took he coughed up blood, smoke, and pieces of burnt flesh. He had had his mouth open when he was struck, so the fire entered his mouth and burned his throat and lungs. He barely stayed on his feet for a few seconds before falling back to the ground, moaning in pain and tears of blood falling from his eyes. The fire had also destroyed his tear ducts. He should be screaming, howling in pain, but the fire destroyed his vocal cords. The only thing he could do was let out moans of pain and incompressible words. He crawled, trying to get away from Adrian, leaving a trail of blood. Glep cough michi michi glep cough cough. The guy tried to speak but couldn't form coherent words. Adrian looked at the sorry state of the interrogator with cold eyes. He formed a ball of fire that flew towards the man. From Sequence 7, the Beyonders are slowly separating from normal humans. An attack that would kill any normal human on contact can be survived by a Sequence 7 Beyonder. Halfway through, the fireball turned into a fire dagger. The interrogator stretched out his hand to nothing, groaning in pain. The dagger then pierced the man's skull, ending his suffering. "You are welcome," Adrian said calmly. He then turned his head to watch the combat of the hunter and his soldier. The hunter, who had managed to knock the soldier to the ground, looked at what had happened with pure horror in his eyes, his skin pale as paper. He didn't even think about it and ran towards the exit, trying to escape. Adrian watched as the hunter desperately ran to the exit. He calmly raised his left hand and formed a bow of fire. He stretched out the bowstring and formed an arrow of fire. He let go of the bowstring and the arrow flew with speed and pierced the back of the hunter, who lost his mind from fear and could not dodge in time. The hunter's body fell to the ground dead. Adrian undid the bow of fire and looked around. Not lowering his guard, he analyzed everything, looking for any surviving enemies. The only thing he found was the still sleeping civilians, guards, Lacopa, and all the dead bodies of the guards. He then felt his spirituality and sighed as he stretched. He still had more than half left of his tank, so he could still fight against any unexpected event that may rise. The soldier got up from the ground with some difficulty and walked towards him. With some difficulty, he gave a military salute. "Sir, all enemies have been defeated, sir." Adrian nodded. "Well done, soldier, you have done an extraordinary job." The soldier nodded in acceptance of his master's compliment. "And your weapon?" the redhead asked with a raised eyebrow, not having seen the automatic weapon. "It got stuck, sir. I was forced to discard it in order to defend myself, sir." The soldier explained quickly, and Adrian looked at the sleeping Lacopa somewhat surprised. "You don't even give your own men decent weapons. You are a horrible leader." The redhead mentally insulted the fat man. He then returned his attention to the soldier. "Finish off the remaining guards, and protect the civilians while I finish here," Adrian said as he pulled out his knife and handed it to the soldier, who took it without hesitation. "Also take advantage and grab one of their automatic weapons and empty their pockets for money or anything useful." "Yes, sir." The soldier gave another military salute and went in the direction of the first pair of guards, being the men who had brought him here. Adrian looked at all the people who, despite the noisy fight that had happened, were still fast asleep. He was quite surprised by this. "I underestimated the effectiveness of charms," the redhead thought, impressed. This entire operation would have been much more difficult if it weren't for the 2 slumber charms he had left. "Maybe having a mystery prior on my team is a good idea," the redhead considered, then turned his attention back to the sleeping people. He will better consider this when he is in his room, but for now, it seems that the answer is a yes. "I didn't expect them to still be asleep despite everything that happened, although it may be because they are East Borough residents. Maybe it's because their health isn't that good. The effect of the charm is much stronger than it should be." He concluded by seeing the thin and sick bodies of the guards and civilians. Sighing, the redhead with calm steps approached the sleeping Lakopa and without waking him up he grabbed the man's leg and dragged him away from the civilians. Reaching where the impromptu test targets were, he released the man's leg and looked at him. His red eyes suddenly flashed with 2 bolts of lightning. Lakopa snapped awake, wriggling like a worm and convulsing a little. Adrian watched this coldly. After a while Lakopa calmed down. What? Lakopa was breathing heavily, his forehead covered with sweat and he was somewhat pale. He had a dazed and confused look. I got a little out of hand. It doesn't matter. Adrian rolled his shoulders unimportantly, not caring in the slightest for the well-being of the fatty. His words seemed to have caught the attention of the confused Lakopa who raised his dazed gaze to him. At the moment of seeing that creepy mask, a bucket of ice water was spilled on him and realization suddenly came. He crawled backward terrified until colliding with the wall while shouting, "Guards, guards, guards." Adrian began to walk slowly toward Lakopa. Now he looked like a predator ready to devour his wounded prey. This only scared Lakopa more and he yelled louder. "Guards, no one will come to save you, Mr. Lakopa," he said quietly, stopping in front of the fat man. Beneath his mask, his red eyes glowed evil. Lakopa looked around terrified looking for some way to escape but the only thing he managed was to see the corpses of his personal guards and his men. His expression turned desperate and he looked at Adrian with tears falling from his eyes. "I beg you, Mr. Holmes. Please don't kill me. I can give you money, a lot of money. If you let me live I can give it to you." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "Then give me the money." "Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you." Lakopa's face lit up and he pulled out a thick wallet from his vest, which he handed to Adrian trembling. Adrian took it rudely and pulling out the bills, he threw aside the wallet and began to count. Lakopa swallowed saliva. With a trembling voice he asked fearfully. May I go now, Mr. Holmes? Don't you have more money? I thought the leader of Deadshot would be fatter with money, Adrian said completely ignoring Lakopa's question. But it seems that the only fat thing here is your belly, he said with disappointment and Lakopa felt a chill run down his spine. Lakopa paled, his skin white as if he had seen the Grim Reaper. There were 300 pounds in that wallet. There's more. There's more. In my house. I keep it in a safe. Only I know the password. If you take me there I'll give you everything. Now was not the time to worry about his wealth. If he was dead how could he use it? He could always recover it with time. Adrian nodded at this. He extended his hand towards Lakopa as if he wanted to help him up. A trembling smile grew on Lakopa's face and he slowly extended his hand towards the masked man's. Idiot. When we get to my house the guards there will kill you. You will not be able to escape. The moment you step in you will die. You should never have messed with me. The fat man thought confidently. Just as he was about to take the man's hand, a torrent of orange flames shot out from the man's palm and engulfed him. Ads by PubFuture. Lakopa howled in pain and began to writhe on the ground trying to put out the fire. Adrian watched this coldly. He had controlled the attack so it wouldn't instantly kill Lakopa. He had only awakened the man so that he would be awake to suffer. He wouldn't have the mercy of dying in his sleep like the rest of his guards. That's brutal, Princess Tomato, Flora said, not in the slightest surprise to this. Adrian calmly removed Vecchio Pomodoro from his hand and answered nonchalantly. A human trafficker doesn't deserve even the smallest bit of mercy. Damn princess, Flora hissed teasingly. Adrian ignored Flora. He put the burnt band in one of his pockets. He then took out the different colored candles from his jacket and began to prepare to do the ritual to invoke the spirit of Lakopa and his guards. Blowing out and putting away the candles he let out a sigh as he got up from his place. He walked to the interrogator's body and carefully grabbed a slimy golden liquid that was in the hole of the head. He also checked his pockets and found a small wallet with 5 pounds in it. Why are all the wild beyonders so poor? The redhead muttered, annoyed, keeping the money. The sailor also had 5 pounds in his wallet along with some seaweed, both kept in his pocket now. He put the characteristics in a container and sealed it with a wall of spirituality. After that, he put it in his jacket in a separate pocket from the other container with the sailor characteristic. New formulas obtained, the redhead thought, very pleased as he looked at the goatskin parchment that had the sailor, arbiter, sheriff, and interrogator potion formulas written on it. He put it in one of the many pockets of his jacket. Now that he had more knowledge of rituals, he could invoke a spirit without needing to pray to a deity, just using his spirituality and a simple altar would be enough. But because of Flora that was impossible. Why would the blessed of a god not ask for his help to perform a ritual? That could arouse Flora's suspicion and she would start to doubt everything he does. He knows he can't fool a marauder pathway demigod for long and the truth would be out sooner rather than later. So he decided to use the next best option. Fake polytheism. If he couldn't use the Scarlet Monarch then he would use the god of knowledge and wisdom. He just had to lie that he had to avoid using the name of his god and Flora would fall for it. In the future, I will use a ritual that targets me as the Scarlet Monarch but for now this is enough. The redhead thought as he walked towards his soldier who was protecting the civilians with a new automatic weapon in case something unexpected happened. If there was a small, tiny chance that the dragon didn't know of his existence he wasn't worried that using it in rituals would give him away. He was sure of this because Klein used the Evernight goddess to perform a ritual and was not discovered until he touched a sacred artifact of the goddess. And that's without him having a hunter's halo to hide the aura of Saphira Castle, the redhead thought with a smirk. But as fast as the smirk came it was gone. This was a tiny, almost non-existent possibility so he wouldn't trust it. Although that would not mean that he would touch a sacred artifact of the god of knowledge and wisdom because, supposedly, he already knew of his existence. If the possibility that he wasn't aware of him existed then he didn't want to ruin it by touching something silly. Before going with his soldier Adrian went to the bodies of the hunters and collected their characteristics and their wallets. Both wallets had £5. Don't tell me the Beyonders' salary was £5 each. Are they that stupid? Are they not ashamed? A sequence 7 being paid £5 to protect a fat piece of shit. That's ridiculous. Even if it's £5 a day that only multiplies to £180 a month. The redhead was completely stunned. This was a complete shame and a great humiliation towards all the Beyonders of the world. Did Lacopa raise them from a certain age? That's why the salary is so low. He looked to be around mid-60s or 70s but none of the guards look anything like him. Shaking his head, Adrian got rid of those silly thoughts. He touched the pocket with the interrogator characteristic. Seriously, the guy didn't know how to fight, how did he get to sequence 7? As soon as he got the formula he prepared the potion and consumed it. Seriously, he's lucky he didn't die or turned into a monster in one of his promotions. Ads by PubFuture. Originally he thought it was someone important but it turns out the guy was just a nobody cultivated by a member of MI9. The interrogator did not know this, but Adrian was sure that it was the case since this organization was the only one that had the formulas for this pathway. Also, the fact that the spirit of the interrogator said that they were wearing a gold mask. The interrogator did not want to wait long after consuming the potion as every 2 to 4 months he tried to pay the MI9 member for the following formula. Then he spent a lot of time trying to get the ingredients by paying exaggerated money to the MI9 member. Just 1 month ago he had advanced to interrogator and just 2.5 years ago he had become a Beyonder. Not even by a miracle MI9 would have let someone so useless be this sequence, maybe in a month or 2 they would kill him to recover the characteristics. He was sure of this because it would be something he would do. It's not like he was going to give someone that useless the potion in the first place though. He has standards. Cursing the uselessness of MI9, Adrian walked over to his soldier who was on guard for any change. The soldier approached him and handed him an improvised bag made from the shirt of one of the guards. There was only £8 in total, sir. There was nothing useful. Adrian just nodded, already having expected this. That will be all for today, soldier. You can rest, the redhead said seriously and the soldier gave a military salute. The soldier handed the automatic weapon to the redhead along with all the clips he had taken, then the soldier closed his eyes and broke into golden dust that flew up to Adrian's forearm. He quickly adjusted to bird soldier and done so, he looked at the still sleeping civilians. There were 30 people in total. He thought about it for a few moments and sighing he approached the first one and shook him hard. The worker woke up confused but when he saw who was looking at him, he was stunned. Adrian placed his hand on the man's shoulder and said calmly, "Help me wake up the others." The man was silent for a few moments before nodding in a daze. Adrian gently patted the man's shoulder and went to the next person. The worker looked around and saw how there were several people asleep, but he also saw how separated from them were the guards. He could see how several had bloodstains on their chests. An unpleasant smell of burnt meat reached his nose and looking at the source of it, he saw that next to the shooting targets were several burned bodies. "What are you doing? Wake the others," Adrian remembered without looking at the worker who was shaking and looking at him fearfully. The worker said nothing and quickly began to wake up the rest who had a similar reaction to his when they saw the bodies. Now all the civilians were awake and Adrian was standing in front of them, the civilians looking at him in fear. The only reason they hadn't tried to run away was because they were afraid. Adrian noticed how he was observed but did not give importance to this, he only looked at the first one who woke up. You, come here, he ordered pointing. The man got scared and looked around for help but the rest just lowered their heads or looked away. A void formed in his stomach, but resigning himself, he approached the masked man with heavy steps. He saw how the masked man put his hand in his pocket and the worker closed his eyes waiting for the pain. But not feeling anything, he opened his eyes confused, that confusion turned into surprise when he saw how the masked man was extending him a 10-pound note. He looked up at the creepy mask no longer scared but confused. Adrian sighed and shook out the bill. Are you going to take it or what? The worker was confused for a few seconds but quickly came to a conclusion thanks to his experience. He grabbed the money and put it in his underwear to the disgust but understanding of those present. He looked at the creepy mask seriously. I'm a nobody, Mr. Holmes. I haven't seen anything. I'm not even seeing anything right now. The corners of Adrian's lips twitched slightly as Flora burst out laughing. What kind of reaction is that? Before the worker could say anything else strange, Adrian held up his hand. You're confusing things, I don't want your silence. The worker looked at him confused, Adrian sighed and spoke calmly. Think about it like this. There are still members who saw you come in and when what happened here is discovered and they know that not only did you get out alive but you say you didn't see anything, what do you think is going to happen to you? The redhead explained and the worker and the audience opened their mouths in surprise. The worker slightly lowered his head with a thoughtful and somewhat scared look. I hadn't thought of it that way. He looked up, confusion returning to his eyes. Then why did you give me the money if not for my silence? Adrian smiled under his mask and held out his arms. I want you to tell everyone what you saw today. What? The worker exclaimed and looked surprised at the man in front of him as did the audience. Adrian turned to face the audience. The same with you, tell what you have seen today to your friends, family, and strangers. It doesn't matter, just tell it. Tell everyone how James Holmes, single-handedly, managed to humiliate and destroy Deadshot's defense, killing all the guards and finally killing their leader Lacopa. He finished saying with emotion and looked at the reaction of the civilians. The audience was confused at him without saying anything. Flora burst out laughing and Adrian's face went flat. He could imagine a worm that was writhing on the ground with laughter, revolting happily because something extremely funny happened. He crushed that mental image with his foot and returned his attention to the people in front of him. He, with a blank face under his mask, took another 10-pound note from his pocket. I'll pay you. That was more than enough for the rest of the people to agree to the deal. Adrian handed 10 pounds to the remaining 29 people and escorted them out to avoid any trouble between them. Just before going up the stairs to leave the dimly lit basement, Adrian turned to the people. Now all you have to do is run and scream as loud you can. The important thing is to show that you just escaped from a horrible scene and are running for your lives. Ads by PubFuture. That should be easy, right? Adrian asked mischievously and the civilians looked at each other before nodding. Perfect. I hope you have a good day and it has been a pleasure working with you. Adrian placed the burnt band on his left arm and made an elegant bow. Before the surprised eyes of the people they saw how the shadows wrapped the masked man and he disappeared before their eyes. They all looked stunned at the place where Adrian had been. It took them a moment to recover and remembering what the man had said, they ran up the stairs screaming and ran through the entrance of the building almost breaking the door. They ran down the street yelling about corpses, fights, and the appearance of James Holmes. Seriously, they are dedicated, the redhead said surprised looking at how the civilians had moved. He had just done a shadow leap to the metal door and watched what the civilians would do. This was to confirm that they did what he asked for. It seems that they wanted to make those 10 pounds worth. Good for them, Flora applauded the performance of the civilians. If they make it out of here they'll have a good future in the theater, Adrian praised and made another shadow leap into the sewers. Stepping into the sewers he didn't waste a second and begun to run at his max speed. As the civilians had fulfilled their part of the deal, he could now escape. If they hadn't comply, well, Adrian had no problem giving them a good reason to scream in fear. Your goodness knows no limits, Princess Tomato, your subjects would be proud to have such a kind sovereign. After running through the sewer for a while Flora spoke bothering the redhead who sighed. Mere professional courtesy, Miss Dancing Worm. Oh, would you mind delving into that? Flora asked. She didn't want to walk in silence, so it was better to bring up a topic of conversation. Besides, it may be a chance to tease the redhead. I used them to sneak my soldier to the test, risked their lives attacking while they were sleeping, and even used them to get the attention of the members outside the building. It would be very rude to not give them their share of the pie, Adrian explained calmly. Oh, so that's why you asked them to run screaming for their lives. Turns out there's a little cruelty inside the marshmallow. Flora said, amused, and Adrian nodded. As I said, Miss Dancing Worm, mere professional courtesy. He had put the lives of innocents at risk, even though everything was moderately controlled and the danger was manageable, it still collided with his code. To compensate the risk those people took, Adrian had no problem giving them a little money. Besides, it's not like the money I gave them is mine, it's from Lacopa's wallet, who would have paid them at the end of the tests. You can say that it was a payment with interest from outside hands, the redhead explained, mischievous, laughing softly. Flora sighed at this. Princess Tomato, once again you show me that you are a soft and sweet marshmallow on the inside, she said confidently. Adrian didn't miss a beat and counterattacked. Say what you want, Flora, we both know you want to take a big bite out of this soft and sweet marshmallow, he said coquettishly, licking his lips sensually. Flora froze for a moment, but recovering she tried to defend herself. Who would like to bite that weird body of yours? The person who calls me a marshmallow every chance she gets may be the one. Tell me, Flora, is there something in particular you want to taste? My lips, my waist, or maybe my pecs? He said the last part with his voice dripping with lust. He even folded his arms under his chest, bulging them. He remembered very well that this was the move that had hit Flora the most. And it worked again because Flora choked on her words. Despite the mask and heavy clothing that covered Adrian's face and body, she had no problem seeing what he had done in great detail. You are sick, she said, embarrassed, and Adrian laughed in amusement. Come on, I know you love it when I do that. The redhead teased flirtatiously, and Flora screamed. Fuck you. Ha 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 ha. Adrian burst out laughing, and he continued on his way through the dark sewers. It took him a while, but he managed to get where he wanted to go. Replacing the burnt band on his left arm, he made a shadow leap into a dark alley. He removed his burnt band as he stepped out of the shadows. He climbed onto the roof and looked into the distance at a house that stood out from the rest. It was a 2-story brick house with a terrace and a small garden on it. That is the house of the now late Lacopa. Thanks to the fact that he had spoken with the spirit of the fat man, he knew everything that was needed to know about it and everything about the security of the place. The security system was focused on the multiple guards that were around the house patrolling, and these were the visible ones since there were many more hidden in the streets and buildings close to the house. Now that the fat man is not at home, the security is not so strong, but as soon as they are notified of his death, I will have to make a lot of noise to enter. According to the spirit of Lacopa, no Beander is guarding the house, just normal people. Sighing, Adrian summoned his soldier bird again and with its help scanned the surroundings. It only took him about 10 seconds to find the hidden guards, and after seeing for a few moments the pattern of the visible guards, he could only sigh. The best way to enter was, again, through the sewers. He sighed in exasperation as the realization hit. What I am, a ninja turtle, is that why I always end up in the sewers? Do I have the face of Donatello or what? He then frowned. Now that he thought about it, he does have a former old talking rat as a kind of companion. Shaking his head, he left the city of calamities and returned to his body, but not before telling the soldier to return. He replaced the burnt band on his arm and shadow leap in the sewers. He ran to where exactly Lacopa's house. He had a maximum of 30 minutes or an hour before those who were guarding the testing building arrived and reported what had happened. He had to move fast. Stepping out of the shadows of the basement, Adrian quickly hid behind a box. He concentrated and his senses spread throughout the basement. The basement of Lacopa's house is quite large, with multiple boxes with unknown contents inside placed one on top of the other all over it, generating multiple rows of disorder. It was completely dark in here and quite humid as well. At least ventilate a little, you animal. You don't want a weird fungus to grow here, right? The redhead mentally insulted the dead owner of this place. There was no one in the basement. Adrian came out of hiding without lowering his guard or his senses. He could hear the footsteps and muffled voices of the multiple guards above him. Guided by this, he managed to locate multiple guards and where they were. Guided by this, he moved away from these areas and looked for a suitable shadow to jump. He found one away from the group of voices and footsteps. Without hesitating, he made a shadow leap at it, Coming out of the shadows, he saw that he was in a very small dark room. There were brooms and buckets on the floor, and there was also a smell of soap in the air. This seemed to be a small store for cleaning products. The door to this room was closed and he could see the light coming out of it. Adrian ignored the door, but instead, guiding himself by his senses, he now managed to locate the guards much easier. He now knew exactly where each one was. The thick layer of cement and wood prevented him from locating them precisely before, but now that he was in a room with thin walls and wood, it was much easier for him to do so. He didn't go out the door but found another shadow on the next floor. He shadow leapt to it. He stepped out of the shadows, and found himself inside a dark bedroom. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the crimson light of the moon. Adrian saw how in the double bed there was a lying figure being covered by a thin sheet that left nothing to the imagination. She was a beautiful woman with black hair. Her pale skin seemed to glow by itself and her nudity was barely covered by the sheet, which did a lousy job of doing, as Adrian could see a dangling breast. Pervert, Flora teased, amused. Adrian only had his gaze on the woman for 2 seconds and quickly looked away. He didn't move a single muscle or make any sudden movements. He used his index finger and gave 2 quick taps to his left palm. His vision changed, but he didn't look directly at the woman but used his peripheral vision to see the woman's aura. The aura was turbulent and transparent. Adrian had to hold back the huge sigh of relief that wanted to leave his mouth. I almost had a fucking cardiac arrest, the redhead joked internally to calm down. Apparently, his trauma with the witches was still strong. The first beautiful woman he sees, he immediately assumes she is a witch. Lacopa never said that his lover was so beautiful. He had asked the spirit if there was anyone other than his guards in his house. The spirit had said that his lover was in their bedroom. The redhead had never expected someone so beautiful and sensual. That guy had to kidnap her, since I don't understand how he could pull something like that. Taking a closer look at the woman, he saw that she looked quite healthy, with full fleshy cheeks and no sign of abuse. Her breathing was calm and quiet. There was also no strange smell in the room, just the smell of a young woman. Apparently, the part that said he was very charismatic was not lying. Letting out a soundless sigh, Adrian headed to the side of the bedroom. According to the spirit, his office was on the left side of his bedroom. He leaned on the wall and focused. He didn't hear any sound from the other side of the wall. He nodded and used another shadow leap to the office. He wouldn't go out the bedroom door because he could hear several guards passing by constantly. He stepped out of the shadows and found himself inside Lacopa's office. It was a large office with a wooden desk on a purple rug at the back of the room and several good quality pieces of furniture to the sides. Adrian went to the desk with silent steps. He moved the chair carefully and with a knife cut a square in the purple carpet. He moved the piece he cut and revealed a trap door in the floor. Seeing this, a big smile spreads across the redhead's face. He grabbed the handle of the trap door and lifted it. There was no hidden space or secret hiding place. Instead, what there was a safe embedded in the floor. Adrian touched the black metal of the box and rapped twice with his knuckles. It wouldn't be too hard to break it, but it would make a lot of noise. Luckily I don't need to do that. Adrian grabbed the safe's dial and began to turn it. 51 on the left, 30 on the right, 4 on the left, 36 on the right, 3 on the left, and 5 on the right. As the last number was entered, Adrian grabbed the safe's handle and yanked it to the side. The safe was opened. Adrian lifted the lid and looked down with a big smile. Well arranged in towers were thick wads of bills, jewelry, and various documents. I finally have money, the redhead thought very happily. His days of poverty were over. Even if it's only for now. Adrian controlled his happiness and quickly checked the documents first. They were all about properties under the names of various people. Either this is Lacopa's extortion or his properties under false names. Hopefully, it's the latter, since I can get more money that way. If it was the first, then he would hand these over to the police so they can hand them over to the owners. He set the documents aside and quickly began emptying the safe of everything valuable. The safe was now empty, but just in case, Adrian started touching the walls of the safe in case there was something hidden. Unfortunately, that was not the case and the redhead could only close the safe in disappointment. Flora, are these documents Lacopa's properties or something he used for extortion? Adrian whispered. Flora took a few moments to answer. Some are their property and some are extortion material. Adrian nodded, quite pleased with this information. It meant that he could make a profit from this. And he already had the right people in mind to sell the properties. Sorry Casper, Mr. Zombie, but I'm going to have to bother you again. He got up from the ground and pulling a silver knife from his jacket, he formed a wall of spirituality. He quickly set up the red candles, red poppies, and the symbol. He put all the money, jewelry, documents, the containers with the characteristics, and the goatskin patch with the formulas in place. He put his hands together and prayed. The scarlet monarch that burns depravity. You are the calamity of the old days. You are the closest to the oldest one. Adrian only took a few moments to remove the characteristics from the containers and set them a good distance apart from each other. He did this to prevent the characteristics from merging with the containers, thus creating a sealed artifact. He also made sure that the hunters' characteristics were well away from each other to avoid attraction. After covering them in yellowish smoke, he quickly returned to his body. Later he would have time to count the money. Now he had to leave this house and return to his room. He prepared to do a shadow leap in the direction of the basement but stopped at the last moment. He looked at the wall to his side, passing through it and looking at the sleeping figure of the naked woman. He frowned. Once the news gets here, what will happen to her? I don't know what her relationship is with the guards, but it is most likely that without Lacopa's protection something bad will happen to her if I leave her here. But should I help her? How do I know that she is not as rotten as Lacopa? But if she's innocent, will I really leave her here at the mercy of the guards? Questions and questions filled the mind of the redhead, who sighed and then whispered. Flora, make a divination if the woman we saw before is a good person. You're just looking for an excuse to help her, right? Flora said unimportantly, but she quickly did what the redhead asked. The corners of Adrian's lips twitched, but he said nothing. After a few moments, Flora spoke calmly. Although she knew what Lacopa was doing, and although she hated what her lover was doing, she could only tolerate it for fear of losing her home, hot food, and safety. She was afraid that she was going to get punished if she ever tried to do anything against Lacopa, so she only lowered her head. Is that enough for you, Tomato Princess? Adrian nodded. That woman was still a human in his eyes, so he would help her this time. She wanted to keep her house, food, and safety. There's nothing wrong with that, besides what she was supposed to do. Report it to the police. Who knows if they were already bought? Report it to the churches. That would be the best idea, but it seems that the woman did not use this option. It was certain that she would receive a handsome reward for turning in a human trafficker, but Adrian assumes two things as to why she didn't do it. 1. That she didn't know about the reward. 2. That she did not trust that the church had the ability to deal with this. Whatever the reason was, the woman was now in an ugly situation and didn't even know it. Adrian's shadow leapt into the bedroom. His first code has always been that if he had the power to help someone, as long as it didn't put his life at risk, he would lend a hand. When climbing the sequences, it will be vital to adhere to his codes to survive. Abandoning them would only put him at risk. Stepping out of the shadows, he saw the sleeping figure of the woman. With calm and soundless steps, Adrian approached the sleeping woman, and as he approached, he was thinking about how to make the woman allow him to help her. Should I wake her up and tell her that I came here to save her? That's stupid, as if I am Prince Charming. That idea was quickly discarded. The only thing he would achieve by waking up the woman would be for her to scream, alerting the guards outside, and he would have to fight to get out of here. Maybe if I put my hand over her mouth before she has time to scream. No, that would be worse. That would just make me look like a pervert trying to take advantage of her. How would she trust me if I made that move? When he was a few steps from the bed, an idea came to his head. She's sleeping now. What if I use Flora's ability to impart her the idea that I'm an old friend who came to pick her up? He had to try this, so stopping a few steps from the woman, he told Flora of his plan. Flora thought about it for a few moments before sighing and answering. That's a piece of cake for me, but how do we get into the dream? I haven't recovered enough yet. Adrian smiled as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a semicircular piece of silver. Don't worry, my dear worm, I have the invitation right here. He gently waved the dream charm in his hand. Flora sighed in exasperation. Of course, the Tomato Princess would have a dream charm. Come closer and get into her and let's get this over with. Adrian nodded. He said nothing more and walked over to the woman's bedside. He sat next to her. He brought the charm closer, and whispered in ancient Hermes. Crimson. The charm became light in his hand as if it had become an illusory weight. A serene and calm black flame began to burn around the charm. Guided by Adrian's will, this blackness spread out, enveloping the woman and himself. Adrian entered a state of cogitation and saw the endless blackness in an oval-shaped light. He extended his spirituality towards this object and the world around him changed. Suddenly, the room they were in vibrated for a few seconds. Thanks, Klein. Adrian thought grateful, the only reason he knew what to do was because of Klein's story. Without that, he would be dead by now, sacrificed to a whore. And for that he was eternally grateful to him. Slowly a light mist appeared in the room that slowly dissipated as if it were a mere illusion. The room was gradually replaced by a huge and vibrant garden, beautiful plants and trees of all kinds covered it. There were several hills and from one of them came a beautiful voice that sang a soft melody. The sky was a beautiful blue-black color, with the stars twinkling in the distance. In the center of this beautiful sky was a beautiful crimson moon, illuminating everything with its soft crimson veil and giving the garden a beautiful appearance. Adrian's blood froze at the sight of this, the semi-cogitation state he had been maintaining had been broken. The garden trembled slightly, the mist that covered everything became thicker and more illusory as if it wanted to break. You idiot, what are you doing? Didn't you want to impart an idea to her? Why do you freak out like a little girl when she hears the thunder of a storm? I didn't take you for a coward. Flora's angry voice rang loud in his head and this made Adrian react and he quickly went back into a semi-cogitation state. As soon as that happened, the garden stopped shaking, and the mist that seemed to want to break recovered and returned to its previous appearance, illusory and hazed. Flora let out an exasperated sigh and spoke annoyed. What the fuck was that, princess? Looks like you saw death in the face. You almost botched my effort, so what's your excuse? The corners of Adrian's mouth twitched uncomfortably. In fact, his entire body now felt very uncomfortable. If I told you why, you would instantly explode from corruption or worse, a monster. And honestly, I don't want to give birth to an amalgamation of worms and become a mother, thank you very much. Adrian smiled softly, quickly hiding his discomfort, and chuckled. I'm sorry, Miss Worm, it's a new experience that took me by surprise, thank you for guiding me on my first time, by the way, you are a very gentle teacher. The redhead said calmly, he had accentuated the last one as if he was referring to something else. Flora noticed this and immediately understood what the man was referring to. If Flora had a face now, she would be going through a combination of disgust, curiosity, doubt, shame, and disgust again. Disgust, because she understood what he meant. Curiosity, because the idea caught her attention and she was thinking about it. Doubt, because she didn't know why the idea didn't bother her. Shame, because some adult scenarios went through her head. And disgust again, due to the realization that she had imagined herself with him in blissful settings. After a few moments of thinking about possible scenarios involving acts related to making babies, she spoke heavily. Don't ever say that again. Adrian laughed in amusement, hiding his discomfort as he looked around again. What am I supposed to do now? Flora snorted and answered. You have to find the woman, implant the idea, and leave the dream. That's all. Already having expected that answer, Adrian sighed and looked around. Everything looked full of life and vitality. Ads by PubFuture. A very beautiful dream, but this only made Adrian much more uncomfortable. In fact, there was only one reason why he was still inside the dream and not abandoning the house and the woman to their fate. And that was the absence of Hunter's halo. He used his peripheral vision and looking down at his arm he didn't see the familiar robe. As long as Hunter's halo didn't manifest, it meant it was safe to continue. For now he would put up with his discomfort and finish what he had come to do. I'll finish this and leave, as soon as I get to my room. No, as soon as I leave this dream I'll enter the City of Calamities to clean up any weird bugs. But Flora's problem still remains. I don't know if she can also catch a bug, but I'm not going to risk it. I already plan to have her say my honorific name in the future. This just gives me the perfect excuse to make her say it. If she said his honorific name, it would be easier for him to purify her of anything weird. A dream shouldn't give us a strong infection, so the Sephiroth should be able to purify us if there is anything. Determined, Adrian quickly headed up the hill in the direction where that sweet voice came from. He quickly reached the top of the hill. Looking down, he saw how there was a small lagoon with a small island in the middle. On top of the beautiful green grass was the woman. She had her eyes closed and was singing a soft melody while rocking to the rhythm of it. Will she know I'm here? He whispered. You are in a dream, she will simply ignore your presence as long as you don't touch her. Flora said as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Adrian just nodded and went down to the small lagoon. He looked at the water for a few moments and saw that it was crystal clear. He grabbed a stone that was next to him and threw it into the water. The water just moved but didn't show much reaction, it just went back to its calm state. The woman continued to sing completely unaware of the water being hit. Sighing, Adrian braced himself to step out of the dream if anything went wrong or he saw anything strange at any moment. He took a step, the water was cold and reached below his ankle. He walked up to the woman and came to her side, she continued singing unaware of his presence. Now do as I say, extend your hand to her, and let your spirituality flow to her while you send what you want to implant. I will do the rest. Flora explained and Adrian nodded. He extended his right hand to the woman and slowly his spirituality flew up to her. The woman was enveloped by a warm aura but continued her song calmly. Adrian slowly implanted the idea that he was an old friend of the woman that she trusted completely. His spirituality that covered the woman shimmered for a few moments before slowly entering her body. The idea has already been implanted, we can go now. You just have to see yourself returning to your body and that's it. Flora confirmed and Adrian didn't take a second and did what Flora asked. His vision was dazed for a few seconds but quickly returned to normal. The dark room welcomed him. Thank you Flora. Adrian only allowed himself a few seconds to congratulate Flora and without waiting for an answer he took out hangover time. He held the pocket watch in his left hand and turned the crown to the right while pointing his right hand at the woman. He disordered the space around her so she couldn't hear what he was about to do. Hey princess, what are you doing? Flora asked a little confused. Adrian ignored the question and quickly put up a small wall of spirituality. He took out of his jacket the red candles, red poppies, and the symbol. Only as he put everything in place did he allow himself to speak. There is a small chance that we were infected by entering that woman's dream. Now I am preparing a ritual to pray to my Lord to check and purify us in case it is as I think. Flora's heart skipped a beat. What the hell are you saying? Infected? But I didn't feel anything strange in that dream. Flora screamed terrified and confused. At no time had her spirituality warned her of anything. What we saw in that dream are some of the authorities of an evil god. I'm not sure if they are her or not, but I don't want to risk it, Adrian said heavily as he began to light the candles with his fire. Flora began to tremble inside Adrian, an emptiness building in her stomach. That's why I didn't feel anything strange. It's because it was the work of an evil god. Shit. Why is this happening to me? Flora was about to panic but she barely controlled herself in time. She couldn't feel anything wrong with herself no matter how much she checked. But that did not reassure her at all. Her condition was still bad so she couldn't check herself as deeply as she would like. She had no way of knowing if she was infected or not. I doubt I'd even notice if I am, it's an evil god after all, she thought in defeat and despair. At that moment Adrian finished lighting all the candles, he joined his hands but before praying he spoke. I will pray for both of us so that my Lord purifies us, but the effect will be better if you pray too. Adrian didn't give Flora time to think and continued. Just repeat what I say and it will be enough. The scarlet monarch that burns depravity. You are the calamity of the old days. You are the closest to the oldest one. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. Ads by PubFuture. I pray for your help and salvation. I pray for you to clean the infection that is in our bodies. Adrian heard the whispers in his ears and quickly began to draw the sphere of light. He opened his eyes in the city of calamities. He looked at his body from top to bottom, behind and front, right and left but found nothing. Nor had the city reacted as it did to cleanse the true creator's corruption months ago. But for Adrian this was not enough. He found the lonely floating flame and immediately formed a connection with it. The gate of flames formed and he saw himself kneeling. He quickly activated his spirit vision and scanned himself from top to bottom. He saw nothing in himself, no shadow coiling around him like a snake, no strange or foreign aura. The only thing he found was what would be Flora living close to his heart. He could identify her by her light blue aura that blinked weakly. He still did not trust it, but controlling the power of the Sephiroth, he sent a wave of purifying smoke to his body. With Flora, I could feel my heart beating desperately. The emptiness in my stomach just kept growing. You want me to pray to your Lord? What Adrian asked me was ridiculous. To save myself from the infection of an evil god, I have to give myself to another evil god. Fuck. I should have never parasitized this idiot. Every day I regret what I did, and I always think that it would have been much better to continue being a rat. Before I could continue lamenting, the altar that Adrian had prepared vibrated for a few seconds, and the door of flames formed in front of my eyes. The magnificent city and the strange figure standing in front of it appeared. I quickly lowered my head, terrified. This was the second time that I had almost looked directly at that god. Why is this happening to me? Before my despair could grow I watched as yellowish smoke billowed from the door of flames and quickly engulfed Adrian. Are we infected? Shit shit shit. Surely what the god was doing was purifying, his blessed. But Adrian prayed for both of us. Why don't I feel like I'm being purified? The despair just kept growing and I felt myself slipping into an abyss. After a few seconds the smoke disappeared but the door was still standing. My skin crawled and I felt my spirituality go crazy. He is looking at me. He is looking at me. What does he want? The emptiness I felt grew much more. Do you want me to pray to be purified? I felt like dying would be a better idea. I looked at Adrian's face, he had a calm and faithful expression. He's never shown any strange behavior, he may be a jerk but he's still sane and has good morals. Despite all the times I saw him pray and receive an answer, he always remained the same idiot. Even when I tried to treat him as a blessed of a god, he flatly refused and asked me to treat him as I had been doing. Maybe it wasn't so dangerous to pray to this god. Letting out a soft sigh, I began to pray. The scarlet monarch that burns depravity. You are the calamity of the old days. You are the closest to the oldest one. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for your help and salvation. I pray for you to clean the infection that is in my body. I almost got stuck on some words but managed to keep my composure and completed the prayer. As soon as I finished I felt the gaze coming from the door soften. More yellowish smoke came out of the door and I could feel myself being purifying. At no time did I look up. Adrian lowered his hand finishing purifying whatever Flora had, a small smile on his face. Good girl. The hidden danger has been dealt with, he said calmly, his voice trailing power and grace. Like a true monarch. With that done, he cut the connection and the door of flames vanished along with the flame that represented him. But there was still a small orange flame in the air. This was the flame that represented the new connection he had with Flora. Adrian could feel all the new things he could do with this. He could bring her spiritual body here to chat, and he could also send corruption through this link as well as purification if necessary. Purification and corruption. Interesting, the redhead said curiously. Shaking his head, he simply began to draw the sphere of light in his mind. Opening his eyes he found himself back in that dark room. Now we are clean, there is no hidden danger, Adrian said calmly. He made a military salute and faithfully said, Praise the monarch. It's good to know. Flora's voice trailed off weakly. The shock of hearing that powerful voice still affected her greatly. She was in no mood to talk. Well done Adrian, you fried her brain, the redhead joked internally very pleased with himself. It seems that his short performance as Scarlet Monarch had been stellar. Adrian didn't say or add anything, he just quickly cleaned what he had used for the ritual and put it in his jacket. He broke down the wall of spirituality and approached the still sleeping figure of the woman. As he approached her, he put his hand where he kept hangover time and pressed the crown down. Pressing the crown would cause everything that had been distorted and disordered to return to normal. He learned this after some experimentation. This did not mean that the negative effect of the artifact would be reduced by turning it off early. It would always be 3 hours. Now I have to find out what was distorted. The redhead wailed a bit. Knowing his luck it would be something ridiculous. Putting those silly thoughts aside, he gently touched the woman's shoulder and gave her a light shake. Hey wake up sleepyhead, he whispered softly. The beautiful face of the woman frowned slightly, she let out a few small moans in annoyance and slowly opened her eyes. They were a beautiful blood red. Not as bright or pretty as Adrian's but still pretty. Seeing those red eyes made Adrian let out a soundless sigh. That explains everything, she is a sanguine descendant, the redhead thought a little embarrassed with himself. Sanguine was the name by which one normally knows vampires, although they hate being called that, it was like a racist slur to them. They are born being sequence 7 and the woman is a normal human. All humans who have red eyes have a sanguine ancestor. Now that I think about it, maybe I'm a descendant of some feverish sanguine, although my eyes weren't red but reddish brown. His eyes had only turned that beautiful crimson color after listening to the true creator's rap and almost dying. Returning to the topic, that the woman is a descendant of sanguine explained everything he had seen. The crimson moon and the garden full of life were self-explanatory. Her dream is most likely something that the subconscious of her blood gave her, the sanguine worship their ancestor Lilith who was the moon. In other words, he had overreacted. His ears blushed slightly, thanks to his mask and hood they were hidden. It does not matter. Anyone would have done the same as me in my place knowing everything I know. I wasn't stupid but careful. Adrian comforted himself internally. It's better to be safe than sorry after all. The woman blinked rapidly, she gave a small yawn like a rabbit. She then became aware of his presence and looked at him surprised. Adrian quickly made a small bow. Good evening, my lady. I'm sorry to bother you, but the time has come to leave this place. He quickly entered the paper he had stuffed into the woman's head. The woman blinked a bit in confusion, but quickly understood and gave a soft little smile. Ads by PubFuture. Please James, just call me Opera. If you call me my lady you will make me feel old, she said, giving a small chuckle. Opera looked around her calmly. So has the day come? Adrian straightened his back and nodded. Speak quieter, we're not out of danger yet. We don't have much time, Opera, we have to go. Opera nodded and got up shamelessly. The sheet fell away, revealing her naked curves to the masked man. Just give me a moment to get dressed and we can go. Opera said, showing no shame at being naked in front of Adrian. I didn't mean this by. The corners of his brows twitched, but he looked away, allowing the woman some privacy to dress. As the woman dressed, Adrian let his mind wander a bit but never let his guard down in case a guard entered the bedroom. Her aura is that of a normal person, so her ancestor has to be an old one. Also, she doesn't seem to have a problem moving in the dark. It seems that the characteristic of seeing well in the dark passed well over the generations. Also, now that I know that she is a descendant of sanguines, I know exactly where to send her. There was a church that was known for making sanguines into priests. They would certainly accept Opera into their ranks with open arms. Now only the problem of getting her to Rose Street remains. Walking like a normal person would take us 5 hours. Using a carriage would cut that in half, but it's after 8 p.m., carriages don't run anymore. Though that doesn't mean I can't borrow one for a while. Finally, if I run at my maximum speed it would only take me 50 minutes, she looks to weigh around 70 kilos, I can carry her on my back without any problem. His physical strength had increased to the point that carrying a person with only one arm is a piece of cake for him. To explain it better, it felt like carrying a backpack. After a brief consideration that lasted as long as the blink of an eye, Adrian chose the third option. I just hope father doesn't mind bothering him at this hour, the redhead thought mischievously. If he wasn't mistaken, the father never left the church, so Opera wouldn't have to wait until it opened in the morning. I'm ready, James. Turning to see the woman, he saw that she was dressed in a long brown dress with flower details that slightly hugged her curves and a soft green-white woman's hat. A sweet smile was on her lips. This highlighted her beauty. Maybe it's your grandfather or grandmother who is a sanguine. Adrian nodded. You look beautiful, Opera, we can go now. He replaced the burnt band on his arm. He then made a slight bow and extended his gloved hand to the woman. It seemed as if he was asking her to dance. Opera let out a soft laugh and gracefully curtsied and took the redhead's hand. She accepted the invitation to dance. Adrian said nothing. The shadows moved and embraced both of them, disappearing from the bedroom. He had confirmed a while ago that it was safe to use Shadow Leap with another person. A gang member had gladly accepted the offer after a very friendly chat. He had jumped into the broom closet, he then jumped into the basement, and he followed into the sewers. He did another 4 jumps and stopped. He caught Opera, who had staggered. Although it was safe to take another person, this one would be a little dizzy from the jumps. Opera laughed as she was held up by Adrian, her legs still wobbly. Wow, that was fun. Her laughter stopped for a few moments. She frowned and covered her nose with her hand. What's that smell? James, don't tell me we're in the sewers. Adrian laughed awkwardly. The idea that I implanted in her is much more powerful than I originally thought. It's as if she's known me all her life. She wasn't even surprised or scared that we teleported. It's a good thing I tried this ability now. If I were to try it on someone important, this abrupt change would draw too much attention. It was as if Opera had been hypnotized. Next time I have to be much more careful when implanting an idea or fact. Putting his thoughts aside, Adrian just chuckled as Opera was giving him an annoyed look. Sorry, Opera, I'll get us out of here, so get ready for another jump. The red-eyed girl agreed. Please hurry up, it stinks here. Adrian chuckled and did another 3 jumps at maximum distance, 2 to get away from the guard zone and 1 to appear in an alley. Opera staggered again, but since she was holding on to Adrian she didn't fall. Ads by PubFuture. Just one more and that's it, he said to the woman who didn't have time to get ready. Adrian leapt to the ceiling and this time Opera's legs gave out. She held on tight to Adrian to keep from falling. Wow, James. She screamed, a little scared when she saw that they were quite high. Adrian chuckled in amusement and let out a silent sigh as he removed the burnt band from his arm. On his way to Lacopa's house, his spirituality had been recharged. He had used a very small part to enter into the dream of Opera and a larger part to implant the idea, and another part to purify him and Flora. And despite also landing 11 shadow leaps at maximum range, his spirituality was still pretty full, just shy of 60%. The difference in spirituality between Provoker and Pyromaniac is completely ridiculous. If I did this when I was sequence 8, by the time I finished purifying as my tank will be empty and in danger of losing control. Returning his attention to the startled Opera, Adrian chuckled, the woman clinging to him like a baby koala. Her head was buried in the middle of his chest. Only thanks to her tying the string on her hat had it not gone flying. He gently patted the woman's head. It's safer to move on the roofs and it will be much faster. I'm sorry I scared you. Opera nodded as she buried her head deeper into the man's chest. Flora, who had recovered a bit from the previous episode, looked at this with envy and jealousy. Opera spoke stuttering, still scared. I don't think I can move on the roof, James, I'm not that handy. Don't worry, I'll carry you. Opera nodded softly at this. Just be gentle, please. Hey, don't say it like that, it could be misunderstood. The redhead thought with the corners of his mouth twitching. Flora, now if she could, she would be grinding her teeth with such force that they would break. Okay, get on my back and I'll take care of the rest. He said, separating from the woman but still holding her hand so she wouldn't get scared. He turned his back on her and squatted down. Opera wrapped her arms around the redhead's neck and climbed on his back like a baby koala. Adrian wrapped his arms around the woman's thighs and stood up. Now that the redhead had stood up, Opera looked like a baby koala clinging to her mom's neck. This was very noticeable due to the size difference between the two. Whoa! Opera exclaimed in surprise, not having expected the man to get up so quickly. Hold on tight, I won't go so fast and I'll try to be gentle, but the trip will be a bit bumpy, the redhead said calmly, and Opera did as he asked, wrapping her arms around the man's neck more tightly. Adrian didn't care about this. No matter how much force Opera used, she wouldn't be able to suffocate him. Ready? Opera nodded and said, scared. Just be gentle, please. The corners of Adrian's mouth twitched again. He just nodded back and started running. Whoa! Opera exclaimed again when she felt the wind hitting her face. She didn't have time to process that because they quickly reached the limit of the roof. Wait, James. James. H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A-H-A. She tried to stop the man, but Adrian just laughed. A-A-A-A-A-A-A-H-H-H-H, she screamed, terrified to see how Adrian had increased speed. Reaching the end of the roof, he took a huge leap and reached the other roof. He repeated this several times, and after the fourth jump, Opera's scream turned into laughter. She was having fun. Can you go faster, James? Opera cried out excitedly, her blood-red eyes shining. Adrian laughed in amusement. Of course. Hold on tight. His scarlet eyes sparkled mischievously. Opera did as Adrian asked and he immediately quickened his pace. The wind hit Opera's face with more force, and she laughed with emotion. Ha 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 ha. Flora just growled in annoyance at this. So they continued on their way, with Adrian and Opera laughing, enjoying the speed, and Flora growling silently at this scene. She couldn't wait for him to leave this woman.